Live at KissWTLZ.com. We're Kiss 107.1.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen. We have a great show planned for you today. Our special guest for today will be Dr. Jeff Gardere. You may say that you don't know him by name, but when you see his face, you'll recognize him from every show in urban America, from Atlanta Housewives to Love and Hip Hop to CNN as a correspondent there and other places. So we're glad to have him in the house. But before we do that, I must take a minute to give a shout out to my producer, Matt. What's going on, White Soul?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. It has been a busy weekend. I don't know about y'all, but I need a weekend from my weekend because my weekend has just flown by and has been extremely busy. Give a shout out to the first person I see in the stream, although there's other people in here, is Rebecca Garth Townsend. Great to have you this evening. But I must give a salute, if you will, to someone in such a short period of time who's impacted my life in a very meaningful way, and that is none other than Joe Madison. We know him as the Black Eagle. Well, the Black Eagle has taken his final flight. In a letter sent from his family, the Madison family, they write, "It is with a heavy heart that we announce the passing of our beloved husband and father, Joe Madison. He passed away peacefully at his home surrounded by family. Joe dedicated his life to the fighting for all those who are undervalued, underestimated, and marginalized. On air, he often posed the question, 'What are you going to do about it?' Although he is no longer with us, we hope you will join us in answering the call by continuing to be proactive in the fight against injustice. The outpouring of prayers, support over the last few months lifted Joe's spirit and strengthened us as a family. We continue to ask for privacy as we gather together to support each other through this difficult time." And that was from the Madison family. Those of you who have been around a little bit, you know that Mr. Madison has made his tentacles here in the city of Saginaw. Actually, he was here, I think it was back in 2000 or so, and he was talking with the group with Delta and the Michigan Banner about bringing Black America together to make change happen. And so when we think about, and I got an interesting story that I'd like to share as well about Mr. Madison. So his accomplishments, the Black Eagle's legendary voice in radio and recognized human and civil rights activist. He could be heard weekdays, mornings on Sirius XM's Urban View, channel 126. On this daily program, Madison demanded action against injustice, challenged the audience with that question, what are you going to do about it? He appeared on Talkers Magazine's 100 Most Important Talk Radio Hosts consistently over a decade, often in the top 10. In 2019, Madison was honored with the induction into the Radio Hall of Fame. Throughout his storied career, Joe has broken ground and broken records. He has interviewed world leaders, including an exclusive interview with President Barack Obama in the Oval Office. A native of Dayton, Ohio, Madison was an all-conference running back at Washington University in St. Louis, where he was also a baritone soloist in the university choir and disc jockey at the campus radio station. He earned his bachelor's degree in sociology, becoming the first person in his family to graduate college. At 24, he became the youngest executive director of the NAACP's Detroit branch before being appointed the organization's national political director and eventually being elected the National Board of Directors, where he served for 14 years. During his tenure at the NAACP, Madison led hundreds of volunteers on several of successful voter registration marches, including a cross-country march for dignity from Los Angeles to Baltimore. The marches garnered thousands of signatures for the anti-apartheid bill in Congress. His career began in 1980 at Detroit's WXYZ. He continued his broadcast journey at WWDB in Philly, and then on to WWRC and WOL in Washington, D.C. The popularity of his WOL program led to the syndication of the Radio 1 Talk Network and its XM satellite channel, which merged into Sirius to become Sirius XM in 2008. In 2023, Madison celebrated his 15-year anniversary with Sirius XM. This is so, he has such an amazing bio and has done so many amazing things. In 2021, Madison went on a 73-day hunger strike to encourage passage of the voting bill rights. Unbeknownst to his listeners, he was fighting prostate cancer during his hunger strike. When asked if he understood the danger he was in, he replied, "I am willing to die." A few months after his hunger strike, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act passed in the Senate with the help of Madison's continued push on the radio. His efforts were noticed by many, including Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who publicly thanked him for another fight for justice. Other notable achievements of Mr. Madison, and I take, you'll understand why I'm taking this time to salute him, because I've had some personal interaction with him that really has begun to shape how I will be looking at doing some things. He was selected to join the American Red Cross Board of Governors. He's Southern Christian Leadership Conference Journalism Award, Washington Association of Black Journalism Community Service Award, NAACP Image Award. He received Arts and Science Distinguished Alumni Award from Washington University in St. Louis. He also holds an honorary Doctor of Law degree from Washington University in St. Louis, and he led successful campaigns to honor comedian Dick Gregory, Motown artist The Four Tops, with long overdue stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. We salute today the Black Eagle in his last flight. May he rest in power. We certainly thank him for all of his contributions. Now to more intimate conversation. When he came here to Saginaw, I think it was in 2020, about 4 years ago, they were like, "Hey, Kareem, we need you to do an interview with Joe Madison." So, of course, I was extremely excited because Joe Madison is the man. I remember probably 10, 12 years ago, anytime we needed to get the word out to urban America across the country, everyone was like, "You got to get to the Joe Madison show, take it to the Joe Madison show." And so I had an opportunity to interview Mr. Madison, and it was the most interesting experience I've ever had. He came onto the show and we started talking, and I was giving some history on some things. He says, "You don't even know what you're talking about. You need to go get a history book and read it, because you don't know what you're talking about. You young people don't know anything about history." He was kind of matter-of-factly. And so I kind of laughed because I'd never been put in that position before. And I was like, I'm on the airwaves live, and I'm being checked by my Uncle Fester. He was so cool. But I recognized who he was, and this is something that's very important for us to understand. Joe Madison recognized he was an iconic figure to me in terms of what he's been able to do in radio. And so I took the beating because my thought was I'm going to allow him to be who he was. And it wasn't done in mean-spirited. It was done in, an older uncle or a grandfather style of correction and just bold stance. So I took that hit on the chin, and afterwards I asked him, "Mr. Madison, I would love to stay in contact so that we could continue have these conversations." And he was more than excited to allow me to do that. So we exchanged numbers, and I would call him periodically. And so probably in about, it must have been the end of the summer or so. I did speak to him while he was in the midst of his hunger strike, and we talked about that for a little bit. But it was probably last summer. I gave him a call and we were talking. I was like, "Hey, Mr. Madison, I really, I would really like to come to DC. And is there any opportunity for me to come and just kind of watch you?" He says, no, you can't come to DC and watch me. You can come to DC and help me. And so the idea was for me to come to Washington, DC this coming summer and spend some time with him, get on the radio and the air. And he just kind of give me some pointers. We talked about what things should look like as we're doing this wonderful thing called radio. He gave me some pointers on things to look out for, some things to make sure that are intact and in place And so I really greatly appreciate him in such a short time. He has impacted my life. Some funny conversations that we had. I won't bore you all with all those details, but an icon in radio has gone on. He has been the voice of Black America for so long. So rest in power once again, Mr. Joe Madison, the Black Eagle. Fly on. All right, so we are here today, and I'm going to get right in to our show's conversation for today. We're going to be talking about history. We're going to be talking about how we are going to really impact our country, how we're going to make some great things take place as it relates to the community. There's a major thing, and it's crazy because here we are in 2024, and we're yet having conversations about COVID. Like, what's going on with COVID? Why is COVID still in the conversation? We're talking about the resulting gun violence from the times that we were locked down. And it's important for us as a community to have some really engaging conversations about coping with trauma resulting from COVID and the violence that remains after. And so, as you know, the guy that I love to have conversations with, he is such a powerhouse in this field. I'm going to bring into the stream, if we could, Matt, Dr. Jeff Gardier, often known as just simply Dr. Jeff. How you doing, Doc?
Man, I'm doing so well, Kareem. It's great to be on with you and your incredible audience.
Man, I am so happy to have you with us. What they don't know, and we're still working on it, because I want to push back. We know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so there's some things that we'll be doing. And those of you who are out there in the stream, we're going to get him into the city of Saginaw to make his presence felt and known. There's a lot of people, as we've been having these conversations, that are excited about you coming, Dr. Jeff, and being able to share on these topics. So
I already have my coat, my winter boots, my gloves, my fur hat, faux fur hat, and I'm ready to go.
Okay, yeah, we don't want anybody throwing paint on you. They don't do that in the Midwest, but out there on the East Coast, yeah, they make those things happen. Shout out to everyone out there. My mom's in the stream. Good afternoon, Geraldine Bowen Walker. Certainly good to see you and know that you're here with us. But Dr. Jeff, here we are in 2024, some 4 years after this thing called COVID has hit the scene. And we're yet talking about the impact of COVID on communities of color, on these communities that were underserved and underrepresented in terms of healthcare. What are you hearing as we continue to deal with it? Because COVID is still a very real thing. What are you hearing in terms of how people are feeling, how communities, Black communities in particular, are feeling and making it through this COVID? Still a COVID situation. It's not a pandemic anymore. It's been downgraded. But what are people doing and how are people feeling?
Well, I think people are still experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, exacerbation of a lot of their perhaps previous mental health challenges. Certainly, we are finding out, Kareem, that folks have had post-traumatic stress from losing so many people, the elderly. We know that so many of us as Black people were on the front lines, working a lot of the jobs, having to be there in person. Perhaps they didn't have the luxuries that some of us have as far as working from home and being able to isolate and so on. And so we lost more people than perhaps most other groups. So we're still dealing with the grief of that, the complicated grief. We see that our children, for example, and I understand, and I was for our children being kept home, but we know that there was also a price to pay for that. Mathematics scores, science scores, spelling scores, and so on. But overall academics actually dropped as far as standardized test scores, regular grade scores, and so on. So we've got to understand that COVID is not something that just because it's been downgraded from a pandemic, as you've said, that we should think that we're through it. I don't think that we're through it. I think that we're very much still dealing with the after effects of it. I think we're still dealing with the continuing and new effects of it. And a lot of people are very, very paranoid because they're getting sick. I mean, we're seeing RSV, we're seeing COVID, we're seeing colds, we're seeing flus. And so a lot of people feel like in many ways their lives have been turned upside down by COVID. And I'll say this last thing. We also know that COVID was part of the dominoes that started dropping politically. Everything went sideways after COVID, and what it did to folks, not just physically, but psychologically and financially, was used, weaponized by certain groups to be able to further divide people in order to take advantage and to seize and hold on to power.
You know, in your conversation as you were responding, you mentioned the first responders. We're now living in a situation where so many nurses and doctors have said, like, look, because of COVID and the trauma that was experienced, they said, hey, we're changing our profession. We're doing something different. Is there, or what should an individual, because I'm always running into nurses or physicians who are saying it was just something that they've never experienced before in their life. What should individuals who have really recognized that they're struggling with this trauma, what should they do? Because this is kind of like a once in a lifetime, hopefully once in a lifetime ordeal, but they're still struggling with
Yeah.
the after effects from seeing so much death.
You know, here's the thing, the nurses, the certified nursing assistants, the people who maintain the hospitals, the sanitation, the doctors, the pharmacists, all of the folks, the frontline workers, the secretaries, administrators, all those folks, had COVID in their faces, not just the disease, but the psychological effects of that, and things have not slowed down for them. There are so many people dealing with mental health issues. We see, for example, 45% of people reported a mental illness in 2023 compared with 31% in 2019. So we're still dealing with that. They're still dealing with it. There aren't enough nurses and doctors and other medical personnel, mental health personnel. So no one has really gotten the chance to be able to debrief and talk about how they've been impacted by COVID and how they're being impacted now by just being still, having so many patients that they have to see, and there aren't enough personnel to deal with those patients. So I would say what they need to do is to be able to be allowed to debrief, to be able to get some therapy, to be able to tap into their spirituality, but to be able to talk with their loved ones and others what it is that they're experiencing.
As we look at this and we see what the lockdown, really locked down for a year, nearly a year, complete lockdown, nearly a year for many people staying at home, social distancing. And now we're seeing the aftermath of that, the mental health issues that are being seen, which probably existed, but COVID did not help that. What are you noticing as we look at the aftermath? I want to talk first about the mental health issues that seem to be going through the roof, and then we will address the issue of this resulting violence.
Well, one of the things that I see is that during the lockdowns, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. The best of times in that it brought families together. It showed us the sanctity of life and how delicate life can be. We took too much for granted. And so it brought us together in that way. It was the worst of times for those who are already isolated to begin with, those who have mental health struggles, those who are older individuals, those who are sickly individuals. Those individuals suffered even more. Children suffered even more because they lost even more human contact. And I think we're still seeing, I know we're still seeing the aftermath of that. We still see that adults ages 18 to 34 still reported the highest rate of mental illness at 50% in
Wow.
2023. And so that is the aftermath of that is devastating. You know,
Doc,
I know
if I could interrupt that 50%, that we can't 50%.
50%.
What
50%.
what are they attributing that to? Like what part of COVID? Was it just the lockdown? Was it the fear? What are they contributing that number to?
I think it is the angst of not only the lockdown and COVID, but what has happened since. We talk about politically what is going on in the world where people are really being isolated politically. They're talking about that there are major issues people have with, for example, not being able to buy homes. And even though we see encouraging, economic reports and things, and we're still doing better in the United States than more countries, the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people who still suffer financially, children who still are not eating. And it leads to some of that violence that we'll be talking about. But more than anything else, people are losing hope. We see that, we have a global warming. We see that there are so many other issues. It's a different world than certainly what it was. And it's hard for people to be able to digest that. Now, when we talk about the violence, of course, we saw that there was a spike in crime after COVID. I think a lot of that is because people had a lot of pent up emotions, a lot of pent up violence. People were living in silos. So domestic violence went up. People weren't reporting some of the things that they should have been reporting as to, violence within the homes and in neighborhoods and so on. But I think what we're also seeing is a real political violence coming out of this. And I think all of those things are affecting people, affecting older people, but affecting young people who, as we know, are saying they don't know which way to go politically. They don't know whether they want to vote for President Biden or not vote at all or vote for Trump. And so it has a lot of people very, very disillusioned. So there has to be, an emotional fire to get people back into a place where they can be more goal oriented. And I think that's a lot of the work that we'll be talking about, in the very near future.
Cherie Steele Phillips, who is a nurse, she works in healthcare. She said that many people are yet being affected and still dealing with the trauma of the long-term side effects of COVID diagnosis.
Long COVID. Yeah. Long COVID is a real problem for folks. We still don't know what some of those after effects will be in the long run, whether there might be some cognitive issues, whether there may be some brain issues. But there are people who are still very severely ill from long COVID. I know that in New York, for example, there are some specialization clinics, but not everyone has the money, not everyone has the resources. And so some people have not been able to get back on their feet emotionally and physically from long COVID, and people are getting COVID over and over again. And even though they say it's milder, I've seen a lot of people get very, very sick, and those who have pre-morbid conditions, in other words, may have immune disorders, other chronic disorders. Those things are also causing a potentiation effect through COVID. So we're still in the thick of it, Kareem.
I understand that. My mother, I was very concerned, about her health, and we kind of had her locked up the entire time during COVID, during the 2020 year. And, I was concerned because she is a cancer survivor. She does have some immune deficiencies and things of that nature. And so I can think about you just personally, the additional stress of just thinking about getting through COVID myself, but then also making sure that that parent is also okay, seeing other people lose major support systems. It's one thing to lose a parent, right? But to lose both parents due to COVID, to lose, as a spouse, to lose the breadwinner of the family. Let's talk about those types of things, how COVID and the impact of COVID and the effects of COVID really changed how some people did this thing called life.
Yeah. So as we know, as Black people and brown people, we were disproportionately affected. So we had more deaths, as I pointed out earlier. We know, for example, in New York, that children lost one or both parents. Black children lost one or both parents in higher proportions than anyone else. When you are a Black person already dealing with a system where you're not treated equally, and now you have this devastation of losing a parent. Now we're talking about the traumas and re-traumatizations that these children carry into adulthood. And of course, everything that you talked about, the fact that we lost spouses, we lost our grandparents, we lost older people, and we're still coping with that today. But interestingly enough, and I'll just keep quiet so you can get to your next question. My wife and I were talking about this. We don't have parties, get-togethers anymore, because we don't know who has RSV, a really bad cold, a flu, COVID. We don't want to infect someone. We don't want someone to affect us. So the gatherings are very, very small, and it's always a roll of the dice. I was going to go see a very, very good friend of mine who is now in assisted living. A friend of mine came over. They had COVID. We found out the next day. I said, I'm not going to go see this person, even though I have the antibodies, because I only had it a month before. But lo and behold, I came down with a really, really bad sinus infection. And so thank goodness I didn't go visit this person. So, we're living in a world of uncertainty right now of who we can even spend our time with, and feeling the guilt of not being able to spend time with loved ones and friends the way that we want to.
Dr. Jeff, something that I think is interesting that we haven't had a lot of conversation is that I understand that one of the most segregated and racist institutions is the healthcare institutions, where we see implicit bias play a very key role in how people receive treatment. When we think about that, and thinking of the fact that some people are getting, remdesivir, and they're getting these treatments that are available to them, and others are seeing, family members die because they can't afford the same type of treatments in healthcare. Does that add an additional layer to the frustration and the impact of how that trauma hits our many communities in terms of dealing? And will I have access to sufficient health care as we deal now post-COVID? But as you said, RSV, like I'm scared to go anywhere half the time to breathe anybody's air. And, it's funny because during the COVID period, my sinuses and my allergies went away because I had a mask on the entire time. But what do you say to individuals who are still afraid and dealing with the fact, if I get these things, will I be able to afford the treatments and the things that are now available? It's an additional stress that I think many communities experience that never gets talked about.
Yeah, so there's a double whammy here, right? One is, are you close as an individual or a family or a community to a clinic that would be able to accept your insurance, whether it's through the Affordable Act Care, whether it's going to an emergency room, whether it's getting some sort of something where they can lower the cost based on your socioeconomics. So is that close by? That's number one. Number two, do you trust the American medical system? And I think that is the major problem here, that if we don't trust the American medical system because of many of the health disparities over the years, how implicit bias has resulted in poor or neglectful care from our medical system, therefore we're not going to look at the resources that are out there, where you can go to clinics that will sign you up for Medicaid or Medicare or Medi-Cal, or whatever the insurances are for folks who may not have blue chip insurance. And if you're not signing up for those plans, if you're not going to those particular clinics, then you're not going to get some of the medications that you talked about that can cut the virus from replicating in half, where you don't have to suffer for 6 or 7 days or 2 weeks, that you can get through it in a couple of days. So as part of the medical system, and I am part of that medical system, it is our job to not only train our psychology, our medical students, our pharmacy students, and so on in cultural competence and healthcare to build back that trust, but it is also our duty to get out there and let people know, even if you can't afford the care, that there is a way that we can get it to you through signing you up for affordable care, that we can actually have televisits, that if you're in a rural community or you're elderly and can't get out to see a doctor or a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant, that you can do it through your telephone, or you could do it through a computer. So we're not doing enough of that, and we need to do that because the treatment is there, but it's not being accessed for all of those reasons that I gave you.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. And Dr. Jeff, when we come back from this break, I want to really talk about violence. And I want to talk about the subculture that exists there and how communities have to really work to make change happen in those areas. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be with more with Dr. Jeff Gadir.
You're listening to Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen on KISS 107.1.
Pucker up, Mid-Michigan. Ryan Wasik here from Bell Wasik GMC Buick, your only local Buick dealer and home with a lifetime warranty. And this month, I'm on a mission to help you fall in love with a nicer, newer car. So if your old ride's left you brokenhearted, kiss it goodbye. And I'll give you up to $5,000 more than Kelley Blue Book value, based on the price of the car you pick. You deserve a ride that makes your heart skip a beat. So bring me your old ride and kiss it goodbye, because you could get way more than it's worth. Do other dealers leave you feeling lonely? My team's passionate about approvals. We kiss up to the banks and lenders who want to say yes to you. So kiss your old ride goodbye. And you can get up to $5,000 more than Kelley Blue Book value, based on the price of the car you pick. But hurry, once I help 14 people, my lips are sealed and this deal's done. I'm Ryan Wasik, and I'm your dealer for the people. See all my swoon-worthy rides at RyanApproved.com. That's RyanApproved.com.
Credit requires bank approval. Vehicle purchase price determines actual trade allowance. Negative equity may be refinanced. Kelley Blue Book is a registered trademark of Kelley Blue Book Company. Offer absolutely ends February 29, 2024.
Score great savings during Menards Super Sale. Menards has the largest in-stock appliance selection, ready to take home today. Pick up energy-efficient appliances from Criterion. Criterion appliances are ready when you are and are designed to last and save you money. Pick up a white upright freezer for just $598. It's garage ready and also converts into a refrigerator. Good through February 11th.
Save big money at Menards.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
When you're rolling Charmin, don't you soft on the party. This is more, so roll it back, everybody. Charmin's irresistibly soft and hella nice. My grip is always soft. It's our party vibe. She's crushing the face, so my cheeks feel flat. So every booty wanna touch the sky.
Charmin Ultra Soft is irresistibly soft and more absorbent, so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Hey, it's Steve Harvey, y'all. Here's what happened on the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
This one's from Gina.
Hey, what the heck is wrong with Junior? Man, y'all get him fit. He's having a crisis. Now he's talking about the Isley brothers against Jodeci.
Gina was bad.
Wow, Gina.
She's
that a crisis?
I'm having a crisis because I said, Jonas, wow, these people out here really.
She got it
Junior,
right.
I don't know if you understand the depth of the statement you made. Kiss 107.1, simply the best R&B.
It's Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen on Kiss 107.1.
This is Kareem, and you're tuned in to Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen. We're here with the magnificent Dr. Jeff Gardier. And Dr. Jeff, before we went to commercial, I told you I wanted to kind of focus in on something that I think many urban communities are trying to get and wrap their heads around, and that is the violence that we're seeing happening in our community. And I really want to talk about the lingering trauma that exists in those communities where gun violence in particularly is a part of its everyday culture. It's a part of how they live every single day. Let's talk about how that gun violence impacts communities across the country.
Sure. So even though the FBI and many of the major law enforcement agencies have said that crime is actually dropping now to pre-pandemic levels, but what we do know that wherever there are guns, there are issues. And therefore, we tend to see that in communities where there are guns, in homes where there are guns, we tend to see, situations of more lethal suicide attempts and actually being successful at suicides. We tend to see people are solving problems not by talking, but by guns. We tend to see that with gang activity, and we know many of the individuals who are involved in the gangs, if they had other and healthier alternatives, not dealing with their own traumas that lead them to being part of gangs, how poverty may contribute to that, how inequities and justice in society may lead to that, if they did not have guns, they wouldn't be trying to solve problems or act out with guns. So guns are one of the major issues, homicides with our young Black people. Whether those numbers are going down or not, one shooting, one death is intolerable in any family or in any community. And that is why I think it is so very important that we join the lobbies that fight against allowing guns to be part of our society, that we fight that good fight in getting guns off the streets and out of the hands of those who are most vulnerable, who are our young people.
Listening to you, I'm curious, if you would, what is your particular stance on firearms, on guns? I understand, common sense legislation. We hear these things all the time, but are you a gun owner? Are you someone who believes? I was talking with an attorney today that said he would never even allow his kids to play with water guns in his home growing up because of how that understanding, if it's okay to play with water guns, what he might be teaching his kids. Where are you with how playing with water guns, video games such as what's the name of the
Call of Duty?
Call of Duty, those games where they're shooting, they're robbing people. What is the impact on young minds that are creating video games in areas where they're already dealing with issues with guns?
Sure. So let me answer that. There are a few questions there. At one time, I was a gun owner. I worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But as soon as I had children, I thought it was very important to not have guns in the home because we know that guns in the home may lead to higher risk of suicide, of accidental shootings. And we've seen tragic shootings in our communities, accidental shootings and so on. Certainly when it comes to violence in our communities, we want to keep the guns out of there. But I also do believe that people who do own guns and who are responsible gun owners and who lock up their guns, who do not use their guns in an unsafe manner, They are protected by the Constitution. That is their business. I train my medical students and psychology students to not make any value judgments when they're dealing with families who have guns. However, if there's a mental illness in the family, the first thing that they have to ask is there a safe? Is there a gun safe? Is there a way that you can get the guns out of the house? Because these people are at risk for something tragic. What are the video games doing to our children? Playing with guns and so on. Right now, from the research that I've seen, that for children who have a healthy diet of different types of media experiences, they may be okay playing those games, but we are much more concerned about children who perhaps have mental health challenges, perhaps who live in a dangerous community or where there is violence in their community. And of course, if it's a situation of where that is all they have is entertainment around violence, then they will be at risk for more dangerous activities.
As we look at this, and I'll tell you, I'm a part of a group. We call ourselves HELP, Healing, Engagement, Love, and Presence. It's really just everyday community. Right now, we're largely a group of African American men, about 55 of us, and we're looking at the impact that gun violence is having in our community. We can look at just the loss of life and say, okay, we lost this individual. But something that we learned is that the loss of life has a greater impact to our community than we really sometimes give it credence. There is a young man who is 16 years old. He lost his father when he was 6 months, excuse me. And he was sharing his story about losing his father and then his uncle, and how that act of gun violence sent his family into poverty. And he was talking about the pain and the trauma that he experienced after resulting from gun violence. Let's talk about those ancillary, those additional things, those other traumatic experiences that gun violence brings to the table of our community.
So certainly what we know with gun violence, either witnessing gun violence or being a victim of gun violence, whether someone is a survivor of it, whether you know someone who's been killed by it, that is a very, very deep trauma. You know, we talk about it, and there may be certain members of your audience who've gone through that, a small number, but the experience of seeing someone shot, the experience of seeing someone dying from a gunshot or several gunshots, or to see someone or experiencing having chronic physical issues for the rest of your life because of being a victim of gun violence, or being at some stage in your life where you were the perpetrator of gun violence and now you're seeing a better day, but you have to live with that guilt for as long as you can. We've been desensitized by watching, I was watching the Fast and Furious today. And, these things are almost comical how people are shot and injured or, and it's like we see it on the screen and we laugh at it. We're not really affected by it. That's certainly a very different thing when it's in your face, when you're right there. That is a major, major trauma that comes from fear, the fear of death, the absolute disgusting, horrific injuries of losing an eye or, seeing someone shot through a chest or whatever the case may be, bleeding out. These are things that we don't forget. They cause post-traumatic stress. They cause trauma that we carry for the rest of our lives. And therefore, it really should be a mission to remove that from our young people so that they don't carry that trauma that then affects their relationships, that affects their goals, that affects their mood, that affects their mental health for the rest of their lives. That's something that no one should have to carry throughout their lives.
As we look at young people being exposed to violence, as you just indicated, if we're looking to really move the needle and make change and really provide a support system, a network of support, what parts of our community, what entities, what role do police officers play? What role does family play? What role do schools play in really dealing with some of those issues? As we look to bring you here, uh, this is one of the conversations that I think is so important. What roles and responsibilities do each of these areas have in making sure our kids are safe and are able to deal with the issues that they're sometimes exposed to?
All those groups that you mentioned all need to work together around the protection, the physical and psychological, emotional protection of our children from gun violence. One group that you left out, but I know you do work with them, are our legislators.
Yes.
What are they doing to make sure that, bills are not passed that allow people to carry open carry guns, especially in communities that are much more at risk for this kind of violence. So we all need to work in concert, community policing and so on, gun buybacks. And then we hear that with the gun buybacks in some cities, those guns are actually going to entities that recycle the guns and resell them. So, we cannot allow this kind of a misuse of the public trust to go on. But the most important entity being the parents themselves, talking to our children about staying away from violent video games or playing them too much, talking to our children about the sanctity of life, talking to our children about the need to develop themselves intellectually and cognitively instead of having to rely on a gun to solve a problem. Being there for our children so that they don't have to find themselves being attracted to the gangs in order to find family, where now they have easy access to guns and other weapons. So this is something that has to be at the forefront of the work that we're doing, because our children, our black and brown children, are at risk more than any other children for gun violence. We've got to save them from this so they have a healthier outlook in life as they get older.
Doc, how do you start those conversations? And I know that these conversations need to start at home with the family. But we have so many kids that are growing up not with mom or dad, but with a grandmother who is, look, I'm doing good just to get them fed, get them dressed, get them to school, and back home and have a bed for them. How do we begin those conversations? If there's a parent out there that's saying, like, I don't even know where to start. Stay away from people who get in trouble, and you won't be in trouble. So how do we begin those conversations about gun violence and really challenging our young people to understand the detriment that guns play in our community?
So, it really is about not just straight talk with Kareem Bowen, but straight talk with our kids. In listening to this show, parents need to understand it doesn't happen just to other kids. It can happen to the kids in our own home. I know in my home here, we do not allow our children to play with toy guns at all. We try to steer them away from the violent video games. That being said, I have a 22-year-old who plays them, but he's on his way to medical school. So, it's making sure that there's a wider diet of entertainment and not just that kind of entertainment all the time. We have to have our mosques involved. We have to have our churches involved, our temples involved. There should be activities at school that are anti-gun violence, team sports, all of those things, again, working in concert to talk to our children, to indoctrinate our children. And I say that in a positive way, that their mind is their best weapon. And that's what they need to develop instead of being in a situation of being involved with guns or gun violence, and making sure that the politicians don't use our children as fodder for guns. You know, a politician said that Times Square in New York is one of the most dangerous places in America. And why? Because it is a gun-free zone. So that kind of insane talk from a politician saying you'll only be safe if you have guns. And if we arm everybody, no, if we arm everybody, more people will die, as we know. We see it in road rage incidents. We see it, in our communities everywhere, that people, they get, no pun intended, triggered, their anger comes out, and they turn to that gun. So we really need to, I understand people have their guns for hunting, for maybe protection of their homes, but we also have to understand that gun violence has us more at risk. So we need to deal with it in a whole different manner for the sake and lives of our children.
When you were talking, one of the things that came to mind was we often talk about, what a child needs to learn by the time their frontal lobe closes and how that impacts how they live. Is there an age that children are that is most detrimental to children as it relates to the types of things that they are exposed to and the types of images that are embedded that they may actually internalize and take with them?
Yeah, so there's something in developmental psychology called critical periods. And these are different times in the lives of our children where they should be able to, for example, at a certain age, be able to learn language. At a certain age, be able to have, more, processing memories, to be able to walk or run a certain way, to be able to understand death, that death is permanent. So all of these critical periods are putting our children also at a vulnerability for being able to absorb gun violence as something that is normal. So at this point, I would say at any point in our children's lives, right up to young adulthood, that they are at risk for absorbing the idea that it is normal to have a gun and to use it in a way that is detrimental and dangerous in the home and in the community.
There was a situation, I think it's actually in the news right now. I think the parent we're seeing for the first time here in Michigan, I think it was Oxford, Michigan. We're seeing for the first time a parent being charged for their son bringing a gun, and there was a mass shooting here in Michigan. It's all over the news. It's the first time we've seen a parent take accountability. What role do you believe that a parent has in these is there anything that these parents could have done to stop this from happening? Is it about being more aware and in tune with their kids, or are certain things like this just not able to be read? What do we do as a community to really make sure that we're focusing in on our kids, that we're paying attention to what they're doing? In the past 2 weeks, I've had 3 cases of young people that were 12 and younger bringing weapons to school. How do we engage?
So it's a fascinating question. There's no easy answer. I have always said, and this, that as parents, we must be ultimately responsible for the actions of our children. We have children who may have mental health struggles, who sometimes we feel as their parents that we're powerless in order to address what some of those situations may be. But at the end of the day, whether we are powerless or not, we cannot give up on making sure that they get the treatment that they need. As a father of 6, I'm sometimes so frustrated over the decisions of my children. And as much as I can be angry with some of the stupid decisions that they make, I have to hold myself responsible as the parent because I raised them. Did I miss something? Perhaps was I a little bit too lazy? Was I a little bit too confident. So, that is something, that if you talk the talk, you walk the walk. There was a very fascinating case of a school shooter where, the child had severe mental health issues. The mother thought the best way to address this child's mental health issues was to take him to the gun range and teach him how to use guns, because she felt that was a way to bond with him, for him to learn a skill. And he took that skill and went out, and there was a mass murder of children. So as parents, we need to understand that, there are certain things that we need to have common sense about when it comes to our children. Regrettably, there aren't always parents in the household who are there to look at what the kids are doing, who may feel, again, that they can't do anything about it, that the kids have gotten involved in gangs. But at the end of the day, as parents, we have to hold the ultimate responsibility. So we better do whatever we can, whether it's just a little chink in the armor to get things going. Do what we can to get through, penetrate that shield that sometimes our children put up.
In cities like the city of Saginaw, we've seen this also in Philadelphia, my time in Philly. We've seen it in St. Louis. These communities have a desire to really, and in the end, it lends itself to gentrification, but they desire to see new population bases. They desire to bring in new businesses and really turn what have often been the impacts of a changing industrialization of America, or a changing in the job fronts. General Motors and Ford and Chrysler are leaving. They're trying to reinvent themselves. Oftentimes, many companies see those violent numbers. Saginaw has, on a number of occasions, been seen as one of the most violent cities per capita in the country. We've been in the top 10 list, often a couple of times in the top 5. When we talk about community violence intervention and really changing those narratives, who would you suggest being at the table for those conversations? What parts of the community need to be there?
Parents need to be there. Educators need to be there. Mental health experts and medical people need to be there. Certainly, community boards need to be there. Our local politicians need to be there. Our community police need to be there. We need to be a united front to understand that even though the violence rates have fallen in many parts of the country, that there are still those parts of the country where those numbers hold strong, maybe higher, or are not dropping fast enough, and that this is a crisis that is not going to solve itself. And at the end of the day, the real victims are our community and our children. Our children are our future. So we must all come to the table to not just have conversations, but come up with an actual working plan, and make sure the businesses that want to be part of these expanding communities, where they're coming in and buying up land in Miami, they're buying up Little Haiti left and right. But what are these industrialists and others putting back into these neighborhoods to help the people that are native to that area, to help build them up to be part of this stronger and new community? What are they doing? So we have to put our money where our mouth is, but we have to have a working plan that everyone believes in and that is well funded.
It takes money to make it happen. So let me ask, we got 2 minutes left here in today's show. Our content and brand manager, Yvonne Daniels, does a piece called Take a Deep Breath. And she gives tips for folks to just relax or take a moment or just reduce their level of stress. In about a minute, what can someone do to really, if they're feeling the tension, the stress, give me some very basic common sense things that people can do to reduce the stress, to relieve the tension.
Pick up a cell phone and call a loved one and talk to them. Sit down with a friend or a spouse in your own home. We don't talk to one another as much as we should. We're too busy watching, and streaming. I don't even want to say TV. People don't watch TV. We're too busy streaming, right? So making sure that, at the dinner table, at the lunch table, that we speak to others about what our feelings. Prayer, so very important. And something as basic as taking deep breaths, breathing, exercising, but taking those deep breaths and sitting back, turning off, all the music that's on and all the noise, and just listening to the inner self.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeff. He will be in the city of Saginaw. We're bringing him here, working out the details, going to make it happen. Dr. Jeff, thank you so much for your continued support and continually being here for us here at Straight Talk.
Thank you, Kareem, and thank you to your incredible audience. And Saginaw, I'm on my way.
We thank you guys for tuning in continuously, making Straight Talk your #1 show. As always, take care of yourselves and each other. God bless you. Grace and peace.
You're listening to Straight Talk with Kareem Bowen on Kiss 107.1.
You've been listening to Straight